Hey, you guys, welcome back. You're tuning in to the third episode of Nowhere to Hide. Now, this episode's topic that we're going to be discussing is going to be for all my Africans as well as first generation Africans like myself. Also applies to first generation foreign Americans of any kind, or if you're just foreign American, you immigrated here, applies to y'all. But definitely, if it doesn't apply to you, still tune in because you'll definitely learn something from this. This will be insightful conversation. But basically, we're going to be discussing emotional disconnect between us and our parents. And I'm going to be discussing the three whys that I conjured up in my head of just why we have this emotional disconnect. And then I also want to talk to you guys about how we can help this, like what I want you guys to take from what I'm saying so we can just make sure this doesn't continue. So starting with the three whys that I mentioned earlier, that were the reason, I feel like the three main things I can really think of that are contributing factors to our emotional disconnect with our parents. Starting with the pressures of being successful. Then I go to saying differing environmental and societal upbringing. And then the last why is the fact that they also grew up with an emotional disconnect with their parents. So, starting with that success, all I can say is I feel like I can't even limit it to just it being like a foreign thing with our parents. I feel like universally with parents, we get that pressure, that they don't want us to make their same mistakes, which is understandable, yes. But, specifically speaking from being an African first generation, we get that, pressure of success because our parents. And I remember at such a young age, my parents just telling me the way they grew up and how it is not like what they're giving us now. We need to appreciate it and we need to work hard so we can give the same thing to our kids tenfold when we're an adult. But that pressure, we don't realize what it can mold into at such a young age. I just remember hearing my parents say that at first, and I was just thinking to myself, like, motivation. Because when you're a kid, the world's at your fingertips. I was thinking, everyone thought they wanted to be the president at some point. At least I did. I was thinking the world of it. Like, my parents came from nothing, and look what they're giving us. I want to be able to take care of my parents. I want to be able to be a celebrity, the richest person in the world. Like, that's what I would tell myself. But as I grew older, it's like, then I started to realize those big things like becoming rich and famous or maybe becoming a doctor. Like, there's levels to that. It's not as easy as I want to do it and do it. So then you start thinking about dreams that are more attainable in your reach, or even just more to your interests even. Because I used to make my interests, as I've mentioned before, more towards what other people I think would want of me. But then, I started thinking about like the arts. I've always been like an artsy type person. I paint like in my free time. And I used to want to be a painter, like, maybe an art teacher, just something in the art world. But it always came back to that money mindset and thinking to myself, like, that's not going to make you money. Or, if I were to tell my parents I want to be this, their first thing is going to be that. Like, how is that going to keep you afloat in life? So the problem with that pressure of success is that you start to feel over time with your parents when that success doesn't align with theirs. Like, you just start to feel more reluctant to share just dreams that are outside of that plan. And it's hard. That already is the start of just not sharing even the most simplest things of what you want to do in life with your parents. But moving on to the second why, and that's differing in environmental and societal upbringing. So that's Africa versus America. Let's get into it. And I guess the way I'm going to kind of paint this to you guys is talking about me growing up versus that typical like average girl growing up in Africa. And this is from what I've heard from a mixture of my aunt and my mom. And when I say my aunt, I guess I'll be mentioning my Auntie Huguette. That's one of my mom's sisters, because I've heard some stories about her growing up compared to my mom growing up. Because between my mom's sisters, they say that my mom was the goody two shoes. This is how my mom paints growing up. And it would be difficult because this is not how I wanted to grow up. But she will say that all she did is she listened to her parents. She'd stay in her room. She didn't have friends like that. Like, there was no need. She'd just stay reading her book, like, in her room. That's all my mom would say. And I loved that and I say love sarcastically, because she would use that growing up, being like, when I was your age, I didn't do that. Or, I'd say I want to go to this party, or, oh, I want to go to this like little after school thing. Oh, when I was your age. But comparing to my aunt, I guess I'll start on that side since I'm already talking about them. But my Auntie Huguette, she's the one that I've mentioned in my previous episodes who does hair. And she's always had that love for hair since she was a little girl. She said that back in Africa, she would always be experimenting on her sisters. Now, one story that she told me that I remember I was appalled, because, hey, you hear about somebody doing that here in America, like a parent doing that to their child. It's like, you think they're crazy, you think they're abusive, whatever. But I mean, that's just the norm over there. But my aunt, again, loves hair, would be practicing on her sisters. And she'll be on my podcast one day. Maybe she'll correct me if I'm saying some things wrong. But she was practicing on my Auntie Mary Louise's hair, I believe. And she was trying to, I think, straighten her hair, like perm it in some way. Basically, she does it. And my grandfather, their father, like, comes home from work or wherever, sees that she did that to her hair. And mind you, I guess perming your hair, like, especially as a child or back when they were doing it, like, that's like a grown-up person thing. It's like my grandfather saw that as my aunt trying to get attention from men. And, also in our culture, you're not able to get attention from men at such a young age. Like, they expect you to, you're not looking for anyone to date until you're literally in your 30s, honestly. But basically, he was mad at that. And what he did to my Auntie Huguette for even doing that to her hair, shaved her bald. He literally shaved her bald and made her go to school like that. Like, wouldn't let her put a scarf to hide it. Or no, I'm pretty sure she said she put a scarf to hide her hair and went to school like that. And then one of her friends, like, just yanked it off her and they started making fun of her. But oh my God, it made me feel better, because I remember the time she was telling me this story. Like, I was already late high school, about to be going into college soon. And like, I was so insecure about my hair and kind of getting out of the insecurity. But hearing her say something like that, I'm like, I was tripping about just the braids I'd be going to school with. Like, I couldn't imagine just having to be forced to go to school bald. But in saying that whole story, it's like, that just shows how serious the society was there, especially when it came to the women, and I guess putting them in a little box. Like, women had to be a certain way. They had to clean. They had to cook. They were expected to not go out. Another little short thing I'll throw in there, also from my Auntie Huguette. She told me a time where my grandfather used wood and literally boarded, like with nails and wood, boarded her window and door shut. Like, she was just locked in the room because he found out that she had snuck out, I guess, to go see some people, whether it was friends, whatever. But I remember I have been caught, sneaking out one time by a parent, like my dad specifically. But like, my dad would have never went to the lengths of boarding up my stuff. Like, people would look at that and see my dad as crazy. It's just hearing those stories and comparing the two. It's just like, it's wild, the type of stuff that was normal and okay over there versus like here in America. But to compare and contrast, I feel like America just had a lot more forms of representation when it came to Africa, and their forms of representation for what a male and female can be in their country. Because again, going back to Africa and like my parents' upbringing, our aunts and uncles, they grew up in a country where their structure was already molded, what a man was just supposed to be for their household, the leader, the provider. The woman's supposed to be there, cook, clean, birth, take care of the children. Like, I feel like it's so simple over there. It's black and white. But, you know, here in America, and again, going back to, they grew up too with only knowing that structure. That's the only structure they see from their peers, from family members, so forth. But for me, they still instilled it with me in some way growing up. My mom and dad, aunts and uncles, all of them, they'll be telling me, like, as a woman, you need to make sure you know how to cook and clean just so your future husband, like, won't leave you, or, you know, will know that you know these things, whatever. Like, they still try to instill those black and white values of, you know, the woman's supposed to be this, play this role, and the man's supposed to play this role. But it's like, I'd hear that at home, but I could still also, you know, go to school and see other people's households and how they also didn't follow that sort of rule. Whereas them growing up, no matter what household you go to, they all follow the same structure. I'll go online or I'll see on TV that there are different families where they go about things different ways, where the dad is staying home and cleaning and the mom is cooking. Like, I feel like it's those representations that I was able to grow up around as a child in America, see the things I saw in my school environment from my peers or from my peers' parents. I feel like that, like, those things, that is what causes the disconnect. I feel like growing up in a society and an environment where they have a certain way of going about things, a certain way where they view their genders, and just overall a certain way of living, once you have a child and you don't bring them up around the same exact environment, there's just bound to be that disconnect of you not relating to the child and what they may be going through around your age, because you didn't have those things, or you didn't grow up in that specific environment where those things are present and you just don't have any way to deal with it. But I feel like as Africans, we go about that by not addressing it. There's something that may be uncomfortable to talk about, and it may just be simply because, you know, the parent has never really had to talk about that before. But instead of, you know, crossing that uncomfortable boundary, I feel like as Africans, we just choose to ignore it all. And I feel like with that whole choosing to ignore it all, that just brings me to the third why that I came up with. And it's the fact that our parents, too, had that emotional disconnect from their parents. Not exactly in the same way that we do with them, where it's just like they feel like they don't understand, but just the emotional disconnect of not being able to just talk about things, anything in regards to their emotions, in regards to just what they want to do in life. Honestly, like I just said, not in the exact same way, but let me just say same but different. Because I feel like what our parents put onto us, sadly, is what they were going through during our time as well with our parents, where they probably had things too that they were passionate about, but didn't really align with the societal structure, with their parents' personal feelings. And they ended up just following along, and, you know, they don't want that for us. And maybe their way of telling us or showing us that they don't want that for us is just by being hard on us in some ways. Doesn't make it right, but, you know, that's unfortunately the reality. But I want to bring up a conversation I had with my dad actually yesterday. You know, we've been talking more just about my podcast, and obviously my podcast involves feelings and emotions and whatever. So I've been trying to drag that out of him. And, you know, one of the things I asked him was just about his relationship with his father. I never met my dad's dad, just he passed away before I got the chance to meet him. But I know just growing up, my dad would just mention how strict his father was, and just, you know, how strong he was too, like mentally and everything. But yeah, that was the gist of what my dad would tell me about his father. But In these last few months, I've been getting a lot off my chest, and my dad and I have had some heart-to-hearts. And in one of those heart-to-hearts, he basically told me how his dad would never let him show emotion as a kid growing up. Because, one of the things I was getting on him about is how he makes me feel like I can't express myself in certain ways. And in telling him that, he was able to open up to me, and for the first time told me that. Even though I could have inferred, but at the same time, that was the first time my dad was openly telling me that he was not able to emotionally express himself with his father. And that may be the reasoning he is not able to give me the emotions that I may want from him at times. And that was a really good understanding that we had on that. But going back to yesterday with the conversation that I had with my dad, he was just mentioning how, because I wanted to know more about his relationship with his dad. All I knew is that he was strict, whatever. But, my dad told me from an emotional standpoint between him and his father, like, he never, ever in his life, saw his dad cry till the day that he passed. He had never seen his dad cry, even in times of a lot of struggle. He would mention when things were tough, they had really scary situations. His dad would always remain strong, never shed a tear about anything and just keep going. And I feel like I get that vibe from my parents and just their work ethic and diligence. No matter how tough things will get, they still have that just tough it out, push through type mindset. But just hearing that specifically from my dad and, my dad already not being able to talk emotions, it was a really light conversation, even though this is such a serious note. It was a very light conversation I had with my dad yesterday, but he did tell me that he never saw his dad cry, and that, his dad put that onto him to where he had to be the tough one and not show emotion. And I feel like just having that casual conversation with my dad really put a lot into perspective too. Just, more about his relationship with his father and, more on what that means with the way he has been with me throughout the years. Just having that emotional disconnect and hearing that from my dad and sharing this with you guys, I hope you're seeing the, trickle effect that I'm trying to show you guys that has happened within my generations that maybe you could apply to yours. There's things that probably your parents have experienced with their parents, which has changed the way they go about things, and they've put that onto you. And maybe you could find yourself re-implementing those things. I feel like, in the early years of 20s, at least for me, I've realized that I am a lot more like my parents than I think I am. And I realize things more and more every other day that, I feel some sort of way about this. That's kind of how my parents thought. It's a trickle effect, especially when it comes to emotions and how we go about things, the way we treat certain things. We can pass that on. So it's just up to us to just stop it before it starts. And in order to stop it, it's about having these difficult conversations. It's a difficult conversation for me to have right now, just sharing it into the camera, sharing it into this mic once again. But, once we start breaking these uncomfortable barriers, that's when, not to be corny, but that's when the magic happens. That's when, we start to become more comfortable. We start to, develop deeper relationships with the ones that matter. That's what we need to do. It's going to be difficult, but start that conversation with your mom. Start that conversation with your dad. Get to know them as the first generation. Get to know what it was like back home. There's a lot of crazy stuff that we don't realize our parents have been through. That can kind of make it make sense as to how they treated us or why they think the way they think about certain things now. But I think I'm going to end it here, you guys. I appreciate you guys tuning in once again. And my homework to all my Africans, foreign Americans, first gens, whoever, have those difficult conversations with your parents. Maybe you'll get some clarity or understandings that you didn't know you needed from those conversations. Just, I know it's scary, but take the leap. Trust me, you won't regret it. But tune in next time, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening or whenever you're deciding to watch this. To live life.